Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Vervoe webinar. I'm Dom Hennequin, Vervoe's Content Marketing Manager, and I'm just delighted to welcome you to this session today. This session today is going to be on remote work. It's a practice I'm sure many of you have got very familiar with during the pandemic. And as offices around the world continue to repopulate, it's clear that some people got used to working remotely, whether it's working from home, working from a different state or a different country. It's now a full reality for people. But I guess the question is your workplace really ready to accept that reality and go remote, be fully remote ready? That's what we're going to be discussing today. Look, before we get started, while we wait for a few more people to join though, tell us where you're from. And maybe as Ashani did, tell us if your organization is ready to go remote. But yeah, we're interested to know where you're kind of dialing in from today. And also we want to let you know that, throughout this presentation, we don't have a set question time in today's one. It's pretty jam-packed, but if you've got any questions, just leave them in the chat, or you can leave them in the questions tab. You're from Los Angeles, Ashani. Cool. Welcome. Thank you for dialing in. Where else is everyone from? Anyone from Australia? We're already remote. Kristin, you'll have to help me here. I've got my guest, Kristin Cherico Dean. MO, NC, and UT. What?
We've got, it looks like North Carolina, Utah. My screen is so small. I'm seeing them coming up. We got Bay Area.
Bay Area. Yeah, cool. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Yeah, Missouri,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
North Carolina, and Utah. Amazing. Cool. All right. Well, look, we'll get started. So we've got kind of 5 minutes for an interview, an intro, sorry, and then we've got our presentation and chat. As I said, any questions you have throughout this session, please leave them in the comments or in the questions tab, and we'll try to get through to them. And then after the webinar, we've actually got a few goodies that we'll be sending you. We'll be sending you a webinar replay and also our brand new ebook on remote hiring. So that's all very exciting. But firstly, welcome. So today I am joined by Kristin Cherico Dean, who is the head of talent at Galileo. Galileo is a rapidly growing healthcare startup on a mission to bring affordable and accessible primary care to everyone, especially the underserved. And Kristin has been there since June last year. She was also previously at Stitch Fix, where she led the talent acquisition function from pre to post IPO, along with previously also being at American Eagle Outfitters before that. Kristin, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Look, let's get started. So, look, remote hiring is already here, and it's not going away. Since 2005, remote work has grown about 216%, and we're now at the stage where about 80% of employees expect to work from home at least 3 days per week, according to our labs. And 82% of employers are planning to allow remote work in some form, according to Gartner. And despite the usual concerns over the lack of the kind of old school butt in the chair time, remote work has been shown to increase productivity, save money, and improve work-life balance for people. So, Kristin, with all that said, are businesses actually ready to go remote?
I think some are. I think, a really good indicator that many are not are it's this whole debate about going back to work, right? Like being back in office. And we're seeing a lot of companies really pushing to kind of move away from this remote setting that frankly everybody's been in for about the past 2 years. So, it's interesting that there is a lot of resistance to it. And I think that comes from a lot of different places. But it's about culture. It's about, the priorities of the company. There are a lot of people who don't really want to be ready to go remote. But I think if remote is a goal, they've been forced into practice. That doesn't mean everybody's figured it out. That doesn't mean that any of us have truly figured this out. Like, this is relatively still new across the board, even for people who've done it prior to the pandemic. And so, I think it's a complicated question, but I think it comes really more into, like, is the culture there to support it? Is it something is it an actual goal? And if it is, then whether you're ready or not, I think there's a clear path to start being ready for it.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I think the culture question, that it's as much of a cultural sort of challenge as it is a technological challenge. It's not just about kind of having your Zoom ready to go or having, someone have a standing desk at home. It's also about, like, is the culture actually going to accept someone, even if they have people at the office and then a few remote workers, is that person actually going to be seen as working as hard as everyone else and kind of dialed in to every meeting that they need to be in with, employees in the office as well?
Yeah, the hybrid model might be the more challenging model for sure. And I've been part of that before. I've been part of teams where I was the only remote person and absolutely was forgotten on calls. Like, people would forget to dial me in. It took a lot of, I think, intention and practice, and I think even kind of creating a process to do this, to do it well. And so, like, I do think that it needs to be very intentional to work. Working remotely is not easy. Like, it is great for a lot of reasons, but it is challenging for a lot of reasons. And I think that is one of the reasons we see these companies often be more resistant to it, try to pull people back into in person, because frankly, it's hard in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. Look, obviously remote work looks different in practice from conventional in-person office work. And this extends to how you go about hiring remote workers as well. So, you're not going to be putting job ads up on pin boards in your local cafe, and word of mouth is naturally only going to go so far. And really, like, the great potential of remote work is that it kind of opens roles up to a literal world of possible candidates. So I guess the question is, like, how do you get in front of remote workers and the right remote workers that you want for your business? And I guess, what do they want to see from employers that will actually kind of cut through and help edge your job listing over that of another brand, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different ways to approach this. And again, I think this is still a practice that is being developed in a lot of ways. I mean, one, there are specific job boards out there just for remote work. And there's like one specific to tech remote work and marketing, creative remote work. Like, you can find all kinds of resources where there are people like really, truly seeking out that specific type of opportunity. But even today, LinkedIn has added a filter that you can filter by people who want to work in office, in a hybrid environment, or remotely. So, like, even the mainstream tools are really helping people both identify their goal in this area, as well as help recruiters identify who they are and like what version they're looking for. But I think there's this other interesting factor around, job descriptions. Like, it's pretty easy to put, remote in the title of your job description. But what are you really putting in the content of your job description that's helping people really understand that they will be set up for success, or that it is, like, more appealing than some other remote role? As somebody who's worked remotely for years, a job just being remote, again, I kind of come back to, like, but is the culture going to be there to support me? Like, are people going to have the trust in me to do this? And so that's something that I haven't certainly figured out myself, and I haven't seen a ton of great practice around. How do you really describe, like, the type of environment of this remote work that you'll be in through just that general job description, as well as, like, what are the benefits, the remote benefits that draw people to be like, yes, this is great. Today, I think remote workers expect to have some sort of tech credit given to them to buy the setup they need. They expect to still feel engaged in group settings. They expect to have this kind of sense of belonging, which again is hard to replicate remotely. And so it's like, how are you calling out those things too? It's like the shared meal service, at Galileo, for all of our company meetings, we'll buy lunch for everybody in office, and then we also give a meal credit to everybody remotely through a meal delivery service so that they can order their own meal, and not only their own meal, but whatever meal they want that day, because it might not be a meal time for them depending on what time zone they're in.
Yeah, true.
Or they might need lunch versus breakfast, or whatever version that is. And so, what are those extra things that you can really call out to really highlight what type of culture you're going to be joining as a remote worker?
Yeah, definitely. And look, we'll get into more of the benefits and stuff a little bit later. And look, one of the interesting things talking back about the sort of job ad and setting your culture up for it is, and that we actually feature in the ebook. I'm going to be a bit like Oprah today and constantly referring to this ebook that's coming out in Dom's book club. But is an EVP, is a remote friendly EVP, an employee value proposition. A lot of employee value propositions sort of, they're designed to appeal to candidates, but a lot of what's offered in there can be very office based. It's a bit of a blind spot, I would say, for most employers at the moment. And so we've got a section in the book that I'm showing you right here that sort of takes a few examples of sort of EVPs and crosses out things that are just not going to be relevant to remote workers. And a lot of them, we've got an example from sort of Strava here. A lot of them are either going to be, like ping pong tables, gym subsidies, snacks in the kitchen. That stuff doesn't necessarily mean anything if it's kind of localized to your physical office space. So what can you offer remote workers to really signal that, this culture and this business is set up to value you as well? So here in the Strava example, we've kind of highlighted, equally motivated and driven as, that's a great kind of positive thing to include that's kind of remote relevant. But then a fully stocked kitchen with great snacks, quick meals, and all the fussy coffee and brewing equipment, not so much for a remote employee. Whereas looking at the HubSpot example, talking about an inclusive culture, talking about being flexible, freedom and flexibility, work-life balance, trust in the, to be able to be trusted to do your own work in your own time. That's huge for remote employees. We've also got another example here, like Yelp. There are some good things in theirs, like, the tools and resources that you need to kind of stay healthy, wealthy, and wise. Where they want, all employees to be kind of happy and to give the benefits that make that happen. But again, a gym subsidy or unlimited snacks, not so much. Whereas UiPath as well has included kind of like, building the future, having a blast in your job. You're going to grow fast with us as well. Things about sort of like growth, career trajectory, trust, flexibility, and sort of being healthy, wellness, that seems to be something that resonates with remote workers. Do you kind of agree with that? And do you have any that you've seen, Kristin, that are really good examples?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen similar examples, and I really like the direction you're thinking about this in, and that it starts to be less about the like, what are you going to get by going in the office, and more about the like, how are you going to feel, and what are our ways of working. And I think trust is the number one thing, and it's on both sides. It's not just saying we'll trust you. It's actually creating that feeling that you are trusted, because it home, you start to build narratives in your head. You wonder what everybody's thinking. You wonder if those things are being questioned. You can get in your head so quickly and so easily. And when you're in a job that doesn't have clear output, which many of us are, there are some jobs where every day, if you're an engineer, maybe you're committing code every day. People can clearly see what you're doing. And you can feel like they know I'm working, like I'm doing the thing. There are a lot of jobs where our output doesn't happen every day or as consistently. And so again, I think that trust is so important. And again, I think I would encourage everybody to step back and look at their benefits and say, how does this translate to our remote workers? I think one of the really interesting things is if you are a fully remote company, it's easy to talk about. And if you are a fully in-office company, it's easy to talk about. But again, in this hybrid model where it's like some can be, some can't be, or you just have the option, then it starts feeling like you have to talk about both sides all the time. And so like, what is the balance there? And I don't know what that best practice is. I think it's still really being developed and evolving as we're all learning about this. Again, while remote work is not necessarily new, relatively speaking, it's very new. Like this is a very different way of working in the history of the professional workplace.
You mentioned some of this before, Kristin, but maybe we can go into especially that LinkedIn filter. From job boards to social media, there's no shortage of ways to kind of get the message out there to employees or potential sort of candidates. But for remote work, have you used any specific tools that you found has been a great kind of way to target remote workers? And maybe tell us a little bit more about that LinkedIn feature.
Yeah, I mean, the LinkedIn feature I'm talking about, so it exists both on a personal profile. So you have the option to identify yourself on your own LinkedIn profile as like what type of work you're looking for. The feature from a recruiter standpoint lives in LinkedIn Recruiter. So it's in that paid version. There may be a version of that somewhere in between those, but those are the two I use. So that's what I'm familiar with. So if you have like a paid premium sort of situation and not full LinkedIn Recruiter, like I'm not sure, it might be there. But in LinkedIn Recruiter in the advanced settings, it is a static filter on the side. Like it literally is just a header. Those are your three options you can pick. So like it is very clearly something that they are encouraging people to really think through and identify through their talent selection and sourcing processes. And so that has been a big one for me. I have not, I imagine that, Glassdoor and ZipRecruiter and Indeed and all of these big names are on par to do the same thing. But again, I would really encourage people to go out there and look at remotework.com and remote tech work. And like, if you literally just type in remote work job boards, you probably are going to get tons and tons of Google results because there are these like kind of smaller, more boutique specific to remote worker focused job boards and communities that are popping up everywhere, both from like that broader kind of general sense to kind of specific areas that you're hiring in. There's telehealth ones for healthcare workers coming around. There are people who are really targeting, and a lot of it is grass roots kind of growing out of those communities. It's somebody being like, I want this for me. I know my friends want to work remotely, like we're going to kind of start this, and they come into building basically these talent communities that have job boards. I will also say Facebook groups are another place that I continually be surprised at what an effective recruiting tool they are, because you can get these really targeted groups of people and the things they desire. So I would go look at that type of thing if you're really trying to focus on that, because there's a lot of people who want to work remotely. There are a lot of companies that can support that. There are a lot of companies who are like, I really need somebody who has the experience doing it. It can't be a first time, so there's just so many versions of this too that I think we're all trying to figure out.
Yeah, definitely. We're running short of time here, but just to flag the ebook that I'm going to be constantly promoting, like Oprah's book club in this session, will be sent to everyone who attended this webinar, and it will be released in the next day or so. So it's coming. It will be coming to you very, very shortly. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the selection process. So, you've ended up, best case scenario, with a pool of candidates from across the globe, potentially, or maybe from different states with varying skill sets and personalities. Are you going to do, 1,000 Zoom interviews? Is that the best way to do it? Probably not. Certainly not what we believe here at Vervoe. Look, realistic job previews is sort of what we create, what we sell here. But look, they can simulate a sort of realistic day in the life scenario and give candidates a sense of what the job will actually feel like to do, as well as to prompt them, to tell us more about themselves. whether it's through text or video or audio, different question types that we offer. So, Vervoe Assessments is a great skills assessment platform. And, the way that we use our unique kind of machine learning to identify strong candidates can kind of help with that. And we think it's a good solution for sort of remote hiring. Plug. But look, this is just, one top solution and one part of the solution of figuring out, who your best candidates are remotely. Kristin, what sort of worked for you? You work remotely firstly yourself, I believe, or in a hybrid kind of model, and you're doing this at a health kind of startup. What have you been trying? And I believe you use Vervoe as well. But can you tell us sort of what has worked for you in identifying and selecting and assessing kind of remote candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a little bit of a different dynamic for all of us interacting over Zoom, right? And that's essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about hiring remotely. If you haven't sought out a tool like Vervoe, which we are in the process of implementing to help us be better at this. But I would say I am a firm believer if you are in a remote company and you are going to be working remotely, if the role you're hiring is going to be working remotely, you should have at least part of your interview process, if not all of it, set up to be a remote process, because that in itself is an assessment. So you want to know what it's like to interact with this person over video. You want to know what it's like to, if you have a culture of feedback, to give somebody feedback over video and make sure that they're comfortable with that. They can understand that, that they're accepting of those things. Like all of the just pure interaction to simulate the way they will actually work in a role is an assessment in itself. And so I always advocate that is part of it. I think where it is hard is similarly to all the ways that recruiting is hard in real life, in person, which is like we're incredibly biased. There's a lot of room for human error. We're not always effective at planning our recruiting processes so that they're highly structured, so that we're asking the right questions to predict the right outcomes and, future success in roles. Like all of those things, I think, help us really start to think about like what are those other solutions. How do you bring in a tool like Vervoe to help you have that kind of structured, I will say bias managed sort of process that you can really help lean on, where you can kind of combine the art of being a human and us like knowing this and having the experience doing it with the science. It's that combination that I think is really powerful. But I would encourage everybody to just think about, how does this job function remotely, and how can I simulate that through an actual interview process, both through in-person interaction and through tooling, whether that is a project you're creating, a tool like Vervoe, a work sample, a brainstorming session. Like have those actual interactions that will be what it will actually be like to work together. I think it's really valuable for both sides.
Yeah, I completely agree. Look, we're running very behind here, but look, we're into pretty much the final section now, which is onboarding and retention. So this needs to sort of look a bit unique when you're talking about a remote version of this. It's hard enough to do it, when you're in office, getting your onboarding right and keeping people around. But, there would be nothing worse than your first day as a remote employee and not having your logins, not knowing where to, what browser tab to even open to get started, and sitting alone in your house or whatever it is. So I guess, talking about onboarding first and then maybe going into, things that you can offer to retain people. What does, the kind of ideal, remote onboarding process look like? And maybe some quick tips on what really works.
Yeah, I think some of the things I've really been seeing that are so interesting and I think effective lately is there are all these tools that allow you to really record yourself and create, dynamic and engaging video content that you can use as part of your onboarding process. So whether that's something you send to a candidate before they start to help them get ready for an onboarding session, or there are just kind of training or informational sessions that you can send them to say, hey, watch this later, so that we don't have to make you sit on Zoom and fake smile and do a bunch of icebreakers all day with us as we're onboarding you. I think those can be really effective tools. First and foremost, though, I would say have a really structured onboarding. checklist. And so, I'm a big fan of an immersion plan, but give remote workers really clear instruction on like, these are the things you need to set up. These are the meetings that are already scheduled for you. These are the meetings you should schedule. Give them something to work through, because as a remote worker, you're spending a lot of time by yourself. And so like when you hang up from that, say onboarding session, you can't turn around to the person next to you and be like, what should I be doing now? I don't have anything to do. So really helping to kind of create structure to give people some insight and some things to work through on their own in those down moments is really helpful. And pairing that, going back to the video concept, pairing that with informational videos, even things like most of us are recording our all hands meetings, send them some history to look at. There's so much good content that you're probably creating anyway for whatever reason in the company that would be really valuable to somebody coming in to learn from. One of the things that I specifically engaged Vervoe around is around education of a job as well. And so when you have a tool that does job preview, how do you share that to say, hey, go through this and like see what a day in the life looks like, or really dig into this piece of it? It's that continually educating people in ways that isn't so, emotionally and sometimes mentally draining, like being on video for 8 hours a day. I also think another really effective structure to remote onboarding is don't start somebody on a Monday and expect them to onboard for an entire week. Start them on a Wednesday, give them 3 days of your onboarding stuff. The first week is always hard and exhausting, and you don't really know what to do with yourself in a new job. It's really compounded remotely. And so make that more bite-sized. Let people ease into it a little bit.
That's so interesting. And, in the ebook, we have quotes from people talking about their sort of the best onboarding experiences they've had or that they've seen. And most of what you've mentioned has come up, things like checklists, things to work through. And I think you were also talking the other day when we chatted before the webinar, Kristin, about just video intros, people introing their title, what they do in the business, so that you have, and over video or just as a, as something, but that's such an important first thing to get your head around of who do I go to for this? Who do I go to for that? So yeah, that's super valuable. And look, the final section is about retention. It's a unique challenge, I'm sure, to retain people generally, but definitely remotely, especially when it's so easy to get drained, get burnt out as a remote employee. So just kind of quickly, and let's go into benefits here. Any particular tips on, we've got a few there, and these are featured in the ebook, sort of don't rely on emails too much, avoid Zoom fatigue, provide regular feedback so you connect that person to the business and their results, and transparency and trust. Beyond that, are there any main things that you see as really, really headline important to retain remote employees?
Yeah, I'm a big one on the Zoom fatigue thing. Like, I love Zoom. I rather talk to people looking at them, but like allow cameras to be off. Do not force like the on-camera policy in particular, because for a lot of reasons, it's just it can be a really exclusive kind of practice for that. There are lots of benefits out there. Like I had mentioned before, we do a meal credit through a meal delivery service for all company meetings so that they're able to kind of participate and also get that perk of like your in-office snacks that you're missing, or your in-office lunch that you're missing. And you can do that a variety of different ways. I do really believe in helping people have the right setup. I've worked remotely forever. Whenever my whole team had to go remote at Stitch Fix during the pandemic, people really struggled. They were like, how do you do this? I don't understand. I was like, listen, my remote work and your remote work look very different. You're sitting in an apartment with 7 roommates on your fire escape on your laptop trying to do your whole job. I have 2 monitors. I have a standing desk. I have an iPad to dial into. Like, I have set this up for myself so that I have the tools and the structure to work remotely. And that is something that is really important. Ergonomics is still really important. People will really physically suffer from like having poor working conditions, sitting at a desk all day in the wrong places. So giving your employees some sort of ability to purchase the thing that they need or the things that they need to have that productive work setting, I think is really important. And then it's about finding those ways to still connect. I think it can be really isolating, even for people who like, introverted folks who are like, this is actually better for me. It's less exhausting. This is a different type of exhaustion they experience. And so for everybody, I think you really need to still find those ways to create connection through the team. And, there's all these virtual games you can play over Zoom now. You can still do the fun, like happy hour thing. On the flip side of that, though, I think that it's always starting by asking your team what they need. Like, what is working best for you? Because there are times where they're like, the last thing I want is another Zoom experience. Like, please don't make me do this. I'd rather just have the time back to actually work, or I would rather have this other version. And so just being really open and consistently checking in with people and being like, what do you need right now? Because it will likely evolve too. I think we all go through cycles where we want more connection. We want to kind of step away from it. It will just depend.
Absolutely. And look, in regards to remote benefits, going off of that as well, like we're pretty much out of time here, but you can find a lot of this stuff in the ebook. Basically, we've got things that jump off of that, like, mental check-ins. Maybe you pay for a local psychologist or something to check in on your remote workers, or a remote friendly one, whether it's localized meal vouchers or a credit. There's all these interesting, whether it's childcare things or, healthcare in your particular thing. There's so many different things to consider when you're thinking about how to sort of incentivize remote employees and make sure they're happy and keep them, retain them essentially. So you can find a lot of that in the ebook, even though we didn't fully get time to go through it today. Kristin, thank you so much for joining me today. Look, just to wrap up, basically from here, everyone, you will get the on-demand recording of this webinar. So if you had to run off early or anything like that, that's totally fine. We'll send it to you and you can watch it all again in your own time. We'll also be sending you the Hirer's Guide to Remote Work or Remote Hiring. That'll be in your emails in the next probably 24 hours. And that will be kind of available as a free download from there on in. So you can share it with all of your colleagues and friends that'll be interested in getting ready to go remote. And I just wanted to let you know that next week we've got another webinar. This one will be on how to improve staff retention using realistic job previews. And the guest is Daniel Stockdale from Dentsu. But aside from all of that, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you next time for another Vervoe webinar. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.